There are exactly 4 seconds left on the clock. The Indiana Fever are down by 1. No timeouts. The ball hasn't even been inbound yet. And the one player, every single person in that arena, is watching the one player the defense is desperately scrambling to contain just missed 2 consecutive free throws 30 seconds ago. She had the game in her hands, and she let it slip. Now she needs to save it anyway. But here's what nobody in that building fully understood yet. What they were about to witness wasn't a comeback. It wasn't even a game winner. It was a reckoning. And to truly understand what happened in those final 4 seconds, you have to go back not to the first quarter, not to the opening tip. You have to go back to a moment earlier in the season when a very quiet, very dangerous pattern started forming inside the Indiana Fever organization. A pattern that almost swallowed this team whole on this exact night. Because the shot you're about to relive didn't come from nowhere. It came from the deepest, most suffocating version of pressure a basketball player can experience. And surviving that kind of pressure, that's not skill. That's something else entirely. Let's start with what this game looked like at its absolute peak, because the contrast between the Fever at their best and the Fever at their worst is genuinely one of the most jarring things you'll see in professional basketball this season. For the first 30 minutes of this game, Indiana was playing a completely different sport than Washington. The ball movement was surgical. The spacing was almost perfect. And Caitlin Clark, she was in one of those zones that only happens a few times a year, where every decision she makes seems to arrive half a second before the defense can even process it. 10 points in the first quarter alone. The assists were flowing. The Mystics couldn't find a rhythm defensively because Indiana kept moving the chess pieces faster than Washington could read the board. The lead climbed to 7, then 11, then 15, and eventually settled at a number that should have been an absolute death sentence for the Mystics. 17 points. A 17-point lead in the WNBA is not a cushion. It is a fortress. Except this particular fortress was built on sand. And deep in the second half, the tide started coming in. It didn't happen all at once. That's the deceptive thing about a collapse at this level. It never announces itself loudly. It starts quietly, almost politely. One sloppy pass that results in a Washington fast break. One missed rotation on the backside of a pick and roll. One isolation play that ignores 3 better options and bricks off the back of the rim. The crowd doesn't panic yet. The players don't panic yet. The coaching staff makes a note. But the Mystics? They felt it. Because teams at the professional level can smell a shift in momentum the same way you can feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Washington started pressing, and Indiana started pressing back, not with structure, not with poise, but with the kind of frantic individual energy that is the sworn enemy of team basketball. Suddenly, the ball movement that had made the Fever look unstoppable was completely gone. Possessions that had been flowing like water were now grinding to a halt. Players were holding the ball too long, driving into double teams with no plan. And the turnovers, this is where the story gets genuinely difficult to watch. The turnovers started stacking. Not just 1 or 2 bad decisions. Not just a bad stretch. 20 turnovers in a single professional basketball game. Let that number sit for a moment. 20 turnovers means you handed Washington 20 extra possessions. 20 extra chances to score without earning the ball. And the Mystics did not waste them. Point by point, possession by possession, Washington climbed back into a game they had no business being in. And the entire time this was happening, the entire time the lead was evaporating, the Indiana Fever coaching staff seemed almost paralyzed. This is the part that genuinely separates good teams from great teams and elite coaches from everyone else. When your team starts bleeding, you stop the bleeding immediately. You call a timeout. You reset the offensive sets. You remind your players what got them the lead in the first place, and you put the ball back in the hands of your best decision-maker, and you let her breathe. That didn't happen. Instead of simplifying, the sets got more complicated and less coordinated simultaneously, a paradox that only truly dysfunctional offensive systems can achieve. And as the game entered its final stretch, the Fever's advantage had been completely wiped out. The 17-point lead was gone. And then Washington took the lead, and the entire psychological weight of the collapse crashed down on everyone in that arena at once. You could feel it. The Fever fanbase, which had been ready to celebrate a dominant wire-to-wire victory, was now experiencing something close to grief. Because this wasn't just a loss unfolding in real time. This was a familiar loss. This was the kind of loss that makes you question whether a team can actually be trusted when everything matters most. And now we arrive at the moment that made this game unforgettable for the wrong reasons first. The Indiana Fever, clinging to their last possible lifeline, managed to draw a foul in the final minute. Caitlin Clark goes to the line. Down one, or tied, the exact scenario every elite shooter lives for. This is the moment you dream about as a kid in the gym long after everyone else has gone home. 2 free throws. 60% chance the game is over with a Fever lead. For a player with Clark's precision, with her statistical consistency at the charity stripe, this should be closer to a formality than a crisis. The arena went quiet. That particular quiet that only exists when thousands of people are collectively holding their breath. She bounced the ball. She went through the routine. She shot the first one. It rattled out. The arena exhaled wrong, not the exhale of relief, but the sharp exhale of shock. She reset. She bounced the ball again. She shot the second one. It rattled out too. Both of them. Gone. And in that moment, time seemed to do something strange. It didn't stop. It stretched. Because everyone in that building and everyone watching at home understood simultaneously that this was one of those hinge moments in a season, a moment that could define not just a game, but a narrative. The story of a player who couldn't deliver when it mattered most. The story of a team that found 100 different ways to lose games they should have won. For most players, missing those free throws ends the night mentally. The head drops. The eyes go somewhere else. The body language sends a message to every teammate that says, I've already accepted what's coming. But watch Clark after those misses, and this is the detail that matters more than any statistic in the box score. Her eyes don't go anywhere. They stay level. Her expression doesn't collapse. Her body doesn't telegraph defeat. She walks back on defense, carrying nothing from those free throws. Nothing. Because somewhere in the architecture of how Caitlin Clark is wired as a competitor, there exists a circuit breaker that simply does not allow a previous failure to contaminate the next moment. That is not a common trait. That is extraordinarily rare. And the game wasn't over. Washington came back down the floor, and Indiana's defense, running entirely on adrenaline and desperation at this point, forced a critical stop. The ball came back to the Fever. One more possession. One more chance. But the clock was merciless. By the time Indiana secured possession, by the time the situation fully crystallized, 4.3 seconds remained. 4.3. No timeouts left to advance the ball. They had to go the full length of the court in the time it takes most people to read a text message. And they were down 76-75. Down by 1. 4 seconds. No timeouts. Defending the ball handler from the far end of the court, every Mystics player knows what's happening. Every Mystics coach knows what's happening. The entire defensive strategy in this moment is brutally simple. Find number 22, and do not let her catch the ball in a position to do damage. Deny her. Crowd her. Make her catch it so far from the basket that even the attempt becomes a low-percentage desperation heave. The inbound pass goes in. Clark uses a screen. One screen to create just enough separation. Not a lot. A fraction. The kind of separation that most players wouldn't even recognize as an opportunity. But she catches the ball in stride, and the moment her feet hit the floor, every single variable of this situation becomes immediately clear. She is not at the three-point line. She is not near the three-point line. She is standing 31 feet from the basket. 31 feet. The logo area. Deep half-court territory. The defender's hand is in her face. There are 3 seconds left, maybe less. And here is where the entire game, the 17-point lead, the 20 turnovers, the collapse, the missed free throws, all of it compresses into a single instant of decision. A lesser player hesitates. A lesser player takes a dribble, tries to get closer, and runs out of clock with the ball still in their hands. A lesser player takes the heave but loads up differently, with the body language of someone who already knows it won't go in. Clark does none of that. She doesn't take a dribble. She doesn't lean forward trying to get closer. She catches, she sets, she elevates clean, unhurried, mechanically perfect over the outstretched arm of the defender, who is genuinely doing everything right, and it simply doesn't matter. The ball leaves her hand from 31 feet away with 2 seconds left, and the entire season hanging in the air with it. There is a specific sound that arises in an arena when something happens that the crowd cannot immediately process. It's not cheering. It's not silence. It's something in between a collective intake of breath followed by a half-second of absolute stillness while the human brain races to confirm what the eyes just reported. That is the sound you hear when this ball goes through the net.
Clean.
All of it. 3 points. Indiana Fever 78. Washington Mystics 76. Game over. And the thing that separates this moment from every other game winner you will see this season is not the distance, although the distance is absurd. It's not the degree of difficulty, although the degree of difficulty is nearly impossible to overstate. It's the context. It's what came before it. You do not get to understand that shot without understanding the 17-point lead that nearly became a 17-point disaster. You do not get to understand that shot without understanding the 20 turnovers, the defensive breakdowns, the offensive sets dissolving in real time, the coaching decisions that left this team exposed and fragile in the exact moments they needed to be composed and structured. You do not get to understand that shot without understanding those 2 missed free throws 30 seconds earlier, the moment that should have broken her, the moment any reasonable observer would have accepted as the final nail because she walked away from that moment carrying nothing. And you do not get to understand what she did from 31 feet unless you fully internalize what it means to be the one person standing between your team and the most humiliating loss of the entire season, knowing that your own hands contributed to the situation you're now being asked to rescue. That is the weight she was carrying on that shot. That is the weight she released when it went in. The Indiana Fever won this game 78-76. But the real story, the story that will echo through the rest of the season, is not found in the final score. It's found in the question the front office now has to answer honestly, with no more room for diplomatic non-answers. Because what this game proved is simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. It proved that the Fever have a player capable of winning games that should have been lost 5 minutes before the final buzzer. It proved that Caitlin Clark's range is not just a highlight reel attribute, it is a genuine structural weapon that changes defensive game planning at the most fundamental level. But it also proved, and this part matters, just as much, that you cannot build a sustainable playoff contender around last-second heroics from one player. You cannot commit 20 turnovers every time the offense breaks down in the second half and expect to survive in a postseason environment where every mistake costs you exponentially more. You cannot blow a 17-point lead, miss the free throws, and still need a logo 3 to escape and walk away from that experience thinking the system is working. Stephanie White has to answer for this. Not because of the shot should be celebrated for exactly what it was, but because of everything that made the shot necessary in the first place. The patterns that allowed that 17-point lead to dissolve are not new. They have been showing up all season, quietly, reliably, like a leak in a pipe that everyone keeps patching without fixing the source. And at some point, the pipe bursts. The postseason doesn't give you 4.3 seconds and Caitlin Clark's supernatural range to bail you out of structural failures every single night. At some point, the game plan has to be good enough that the genius of your best player is an advantage instead of a lifeline. But on this night, on this specific, chaotic, magnificent, deeply flawed night, it didn't matter. Because with 4 seconds left and the weight of a blown season on her shoulders, Caitlin Clark caught the ball 31 feet from the basket, rose up without a single moment of hesitation, and reminded every person watching exactly why some players exist in a category completely by themselves. She missed the free throws. She hit the logo 3. And the Indiana Fever, somehow, impossibly, walked off the floor with a win that feels less like a victory and more like a warning. A warning to the rest of the league that this team, broken as it sometimes is, contains something that cannot be schemed against, cannot be pressured into submission, and apparently cannot be stopped even when the clock reads 4.3 seconds and hope has almost completely run out. The question is whether the people running this organization understand what they actually have. Because wasting her would be the real collapse. And that story is still being written.